Merry meet. I'm Sapphire, your occultorium historian, and today we're going to be taking a dark look at history. Specifically, we're going to be diving into what was my research project over the summer. We're going to be taking a look at the sin and secrecies of science and medicine during World War II. For more information on this piece and my research that I did, I invite you to visit pacificatrocitieseducation.org, where you can find more work, more research on Unit 731, and various Pacific War events that took place. Beneath the hum of fluorescent lights in the antiseptic halls of hospitals, we expect mercy. The very word hospital carries an echo of hospitality, healing. You are expecting for it to be a place for the sick, the wounded, and the dying to be tended to with compassion. But in the years of the Second World War, one such location in Tokyo became something else entirely. Now, while it is referred to the Shinagawa Prisoner of War Hospital, it was far from a hospital. Through records that I managed to find, and I will show them here, the Shinagawa Prisoner of War Hospital was more of a ramshackled series of sheds that were built on an isolated island right off the Bay of Tokyo. And it was built by the very prisoners themselves. It was built in a state of disarray, and it honestly, from aerial photos, it does not look like anything save for maybe a storage yard. So that is the location where the story takes place. Behind windows and walls of steel, the Shinagawa Prisoner of War Hospital stood not as a sanctuary of healing during World War II. Instead, it was a prisoner of war camp, and unfortunately, it became a site where the practice of medicine was turned inside out. This story today is going to revolve around one very notorious person, that of Dr. Hayasakichi Tokura, a man whose name never really became as infamous as Shiro Ishii of Unit 731, but his crimes were no less a product of the same collapse of conscience. His hospital, while significantly smaller, was no less haunted by the ghosts of science gone astray. Welcome to the Hospital of Shadows, also known as Shinagawa Prisoner of War Camp. Alright, so in 1941, as Japan's empire expanded and war consumed the Pacific, a new camp was constructed on the outskirts of Tokyo. It was called Shinagawa Prisoner of War Hospital, and soon after its construction, it was renamed Omori. Officially, it was a facility for Allied prisoners of war who were sick or injured and were too sick for forced labor. So it was supposed to be a place where, yes, they're still prisoners, but they are there to be treated so that way they could go back to camps and be forced to labor. Unfortunately, this became a place of unimaginable suffering. Testimonies and post war investigations describe a world of neglect and degradation. Through Colonel Henry Lyne's reports, he preserved through them the telling of overcrowding, starvation, infestations so severe that rats seemed to swarm even the garden where prisoners were forced to use infected human feces as fertilizer. This supposed hospital was, in truth, a final descent into moral decay during the war. The men who entered it did not find medicine. Instead, they found what could only be described as an illusion of it. Uh, and with that, we're going to get into the most horrific part of this story. At the center of this is Dr. Hayasakichi Tokura. Now, I mentioned him earlier. He was a medical commandant of Shinagawa. He was trained within the imperial system, and Tokuda was more than just a physician. He was also an officer, a scientist, and most notably, a man convinced that the boundaries of the human body existed to be tested. So, the resources that I used for all of this research is that of the Yokohama War Crimes trials. They are free to access, link here, link in the description below, and I invite you to explore them. These are the trials that took place post World War II, focusing on Japan and the war crimes that took place there. Survivors described Tokuda's experiments in horrific, chilling detail during these trials, and one of the primary obsessions that Tokuda seemed to have was that of soybean milk injections. It is exactly what I am describing to you. A thick, protein rich liquid that he believed could serve as an injectable nutrient. Now, during World War II, Japan prisoners of war, they had soybean milk as a dietary requirement. Soybean milk is very high in protein, it's nutritious, and during a time of a little food, soybean milk was easy to obtain. This milk in particular was made in house. The prisoners would make it fresh daily for their companions to drink through the kitchens. And whenever it was made, some would be set aside for experimentations later. So, this is the fresh made soy milk by the very prisoners themselves that would later go on to kill a few that we know of. And I say that we know of. Now, Williamson, a surviving prisoner of war who worked in the camp hospital, he worked as a nurse. He testified pretty extensively throughout the Tokuda trial. Tokuda was the one who apparently ordered him to set aside a cup of soy milk each day for these injections, and the results that he described were catastrophic. The first recorded and known victim is that of British prisoner named Holland. He died shortly after his first injection, and soon others followed. Uh, from the names that I've been able to find, we have Thomas Hampston, Ernesto Saxida, Raymond Leese, Clifford Fusselman, and Walter Dawson, all subjected to these untested treatments, and all unfortunately died from them. Ernesto Saxida is a special case in this situation. He would survive the first round and the second round, but the third round of injections would kill him. Last injection was put in his neck, and soon after that final injection, it would prove fatal. The mixture caused violent reactions from all of these patients: swelling, fevers, tissue necrosis, convulsions, seizures, death. Yet Tokuda falsified these death certificates, and we do have evidence of this within the trial records. He rewrote each experiment as a natural death, of a stomach ailment, pneumonia, even one he wrote down as a complication of cancer, and he would not allow the Allied prisoners of war to examine the bodies post death. He would immediately send them off to the morgue where they would be autopsied by someone who had no idea what was going on. Witnesses described him as extremely volatile, arrogant, and violent. Even a Commander Davis, who would testify later, he was a camp officer, recalled how Tokuda would strike prisoners who refused to submit to operations, leaving them no choice. When one man failed to salute him quickly enough, Tokuda was found to have beaten him in front of the others. This is a severe gesture of control. Dr. Gottlieb was also a prisoner of war during the time within the camp, but he was a doctor. So he had the ability to work on Allied prisoners in absence of the Japanese officials. He testified that Tokuda often conducted these experiments in secrecy, barring others from observing. Quote, he thought he was going to make some great discovery, unquote, Dr. Gottlieb said during testimony. And he didn't want anyone else to be in on these discoveries. Now, soy milk injections were not the only things that he did during his time at Shinagawa. He had an obsession, a hunger to be remembered as a scientific pioneer. He thought he was going to cure tuberculosis. Everything is tuberculosis. Uh, if you know, you know. And he kind of weaponized this. It made him very dangerous, and he was not motivated by hatred or revenge, but by a very high level of ambition. So Tokuda was no different than the Dr. Shiro Ishii of Unit 731. If you don't know Dr. Shiro Ishii, he weaponized plague and anthrax under the banner of patriotic science. Now, this took place, Unit 731, started in the 1930s, before the war really broke out in earnest. He focused in Manchuria, and it was a vast and industrial complex of Unit 731. Tokuda's, on the other hand, were intimate. His experiments conducted were face to face, body to body, within a small space that was meant for healing, not an industrial complex. But his experiments took place in 1943 to 1945, so well after the notorious Unit 731. I was not able to find any verifications that Ishii and Tokuda would have run in the same circles, but given that Ishii went to similar medical schools within the Japanese complex, and Tokuda was well established within that same complex, and we do see the similarities and mixings of doctors throughout different camps, it could be assumed pretty safely that Dr. Hayasakichi Tokuda was heavily inspired by Shiro Ishii. It would be easy to see Tokuda as a singular monster, a mad doctor working within isolation, but the evidence tells another story. His hospital operated within a much larger network of wartime medicine that had abandoned ethics entirely at that point. Across Japan and its colonies, the boundaries between care and cruelty had really become blurred beyond recognition. And with that, we do have a new figure, Dr. Hiroshi Fuji, one of Tokuda's colleagues. Fuji oversaw medical operations across Tokyo's prisoner of war camps. Officially, he was responsible for disease control and preventative medicine. In reality, his preventative measures often inflicted suffering and death. Trial docket 111 revealed that Fuji routinely beat prisoners, denied care to the sick, and sent terminally ill to perform hard labor still. His actions, similar to Tokuda's, were rationalized as administrative necessity, cruelty reframed as discipline. So the system itself rewarded this behavior, it seems. Medical officers were encouraged to emulate figures such as Shiro Ishii. Tokuda's hospital was not an aberration, it was a logical outcome of a state that had redefined science as a weapon of war. Now, a testimony that really stuck out to me during this research was that of Chief Radioman Goodman. He suffered from paralysis brought on by starvation and disease during the war and was a prisoner at Shinagawa. He recalled being injected with a lumpy mixture of sulfur and castor oil directly into his spine. It left him feverish for days, and his body stiffened, his legs refusing to bend, and that the pain was absolutely unbearable. He also recalled that others endured repeated spinal injections along with him. 20 to 30 of those being doses of vitamin B1 and C. These were also experimental, masquerading as therapy during the time. To mention within his testimony that some of the men began to walk simply to avoid more injections. These were not statistics or specimens, these were human beings clinging to life in a place where compassion had been systematically erased at this point. The psychological toll had to have been immense. Survivors describing the betrayal of trust, to suffer not from the enemy's bullet, but by the hands of the doctor who was supposed to heal them. How does a healer become an executioner, you might be asking? How does a hospital become a crime scene? Well, that's pretty easy. For us true crime junkies, we know how that happens. But in this situation, we need to look at the culture that produced Tokura. In pre war Japan, the medical profession operated within a minimal legal oversight. Consent from patients or families was not required, and experimentation often took place without regulation. When the empire entered total war, these permissivenesses emerged with military hierarchy and nationalist ideology. It created its own little monster. Doctors were no longer accountable for the individual, only to the state. And the result was a complete collapse of medical ethics, so profound that atrocities could masquerade as scientific progress. Through this research, I went through to try to find the Japanese medical staff that was on during the wartime. And there were quite a few testimonies that took place post war through trial testimony and through personal memoirs. Within the trial documentation, they do regularly refer to consent not being legally required, and that physicians could proceed as they saw fit, and that even though very few of the medical experiments or approved medical procedures could be done without seeking the state approval, most doctors went ahead and did it anyways and died with the secrets. Philosopher Hannah Arendt once described the blatantity of evil, the idea that great crimes are not always committed by monsters, but by ordinary people who fail to think critically about their obedience. Tokura, Fuji, and their superiors embody the concept with chilling precision. They were not driven by sadism alone, but by duty, routine, and the relentless pursuit of professional status. Even cruelty became administrative. Paperwork was filled, charts were updated, deaths were categorized, bureaucracy concealed, atrocity beneath the calm surface of official order. Every injection had a form, every vivisection had a witness list. The machinery of empire ensured that the horror appeared legitimate. And when it finally didn't, they tried to bury the evidence. Japan surrendered in August of 1945. The Shinagawa Hospital was not totally abandoned. With the release of prisoners, the Omori prisoner of war camp, or formerly the Shinagawa Hospital, was turned into the new prisoner camp for those that were on trial at the Yokohama trials. But with that, we have documents such as Docket 186, Docket 111, Docket 296 of the Yokohama Class B and C war crimes trials. Those are the ones that I used. Like I said, I want you to explore these war crimes. These trials are crazy to read through. Within these dockets, specifically, they detail the experiments, the names of victims, and even the falsified medical reports. But in post wars, these stories absolutely faded to obscurity. While Unit 731's crimes became the focus of international outrage, the atrocities of Shinagawa remained forgotten, buried beneath politics, diplomacy, and the world's eagerness to move on. Tokuro was tried, but his name never entered public consciousness. Fuji's case was briefly documented, but then lost to history. The archives held the truth, but no one really opened them until recently. Now, how does this relate to our channel? The word occult means hidden. Then the story of Shinagawa is kind of the occult history of World War II. A secret buried beneath the official record. A wound sealed under the bandages of progress. Now, in this sense, the hospital itself becomes a haunted space. Not by the ghosts of literal sense, but by the residue of forgotten suffering. To study these spaces and these stories is to confront the darker side of our belief in science. For even the most rational systems can become rituals of violence when divorced from empathy. Shinagawa was a temple of atrocity, a hospital of atrocity, a reason that unchecked morality is its own kind of superstition. In the end, what perished at Shinagawa was not only that of human life, but the very idea of healing others. Medicine, the art of care, and it had been transformed into a weapon. Doctors who once swore to heal the sick, tend to the needy, had become agents of death. The horrors of Shinagawa are not that such things were done, but that they were done in the name of knowledge. With that said, though, history is like a patient unhealed. It continues to ache where the wound was made until we historians choose to tend to that wound. And hopefully, me talking about this today has tended to that wound. I would love to go into it more in depth for you all in the future, as through this research, I discovered a lot more stories, a lot more names, and a lot more dark history that needs to be brought to light. I will say, though, for more information on Dr. Hayasakichi Tokada, the vivisections of Shinagawa, I do invite you to watch the other videos that I made for the Pacific Front Untold channel here. Please leave a like, leave a comment. I would love to hear your thoughts. And until then, stay curious. I want to take a moment to thank the very patrons that made this channel possible. Thank you so much. And for more information and to support Occultorium Historian, I invite you to go to patreon.com/Occultorium Historian today. Stay curious.